Tonight we slip into a world you've probably never thought about before, the narrow, lamplit alleys of Ottoman Istanbul. You can almost smell it already, can't you? That deep, roasted aroma curling out from a shuttered window, cutting through the fishy tang of the Bosphorus breeze. The stones are slick beneath your sandals, a cat darts across your path, and somewhere ahead, a man stirs something over glowing coals. He's not cooking dinner. He's preparing the most suspicious, intoxicating liquid of his day, coffee. Now, I should warn you, if you were actually there, creeping through these alleyways in the year 1650, you probably wouldn't survive this little adventure. Coffee isn't just coffee here. It's politics. It's rebellion. It's poetry and paranoia poured steaming into little cups. Sip too loudly at the wrong stall, and you might find yourself accused of conspiracy before you've even finished your foam. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice when you stumble onto that crooked back street is the glow of embers. The seller crouches low, a copper pot balanced precariously above the coals, long-handled ladle in his hand. His stall looks more like a magician's cabinet than a kitchen. Small jars of cardamom, a pouch of cloves, spoons with handles so long they could be fencing foils. His eyes flick toward you but say nothing. Around here, every customer is a risk. You could be a loyal drinker or a government spy. Here's the mainstream historical fact of the night. Coffee first entered the Ottoman world in the early 16th century, most likely smuggled north from Yemen. By the mid-1500s, Istanbul was already buzzing with cafes, known as kahvehane. They were new, exciting, and deeply suspicious to the authorities. Why? Because unlike taverns, where people just got drunk and rowdy, coffee houses sharpened the mind. People gathered, debated, and sometimes plotted. And for rulers who preferred obedient subjects, that sounded dangerous. You lean in as the seller pours a stream of black liquid into a tiny porcelain cup. No sugar, no milk. Just pure roasted defiance. He doesn't ask your name. Instead, he whispers, "Sit." The bench creaks under your weight, and suddenly you're part of a centuries-old secret society, one where cups replace swords, and foam on top is a silent password. But let's slip in a quirky tidbit. Early Ottoman sellers didn't just serve coffee. They also sold odd little side services. One might sprinkle perfumed water over your hands before you drank. Another offered the latest jokes along with your cup, like a proto-stand-up comedy routine. And some, historians say, rented out parrots that had been trained to shout compliments at passing customers. Imagine trying to sip your brew while a bird screams, handsome man, at you from a cage overhead. The coffee itself becomes part of the scenery. Thick, sludgy, more spoonable than drinkable. You notice how slowly everyone sips, stretching a single cup across hours. The seller doesn't mind. His profit doesn't come from speed, it comes from trust. In a city where an overheard phrase can ruin you, coffee sellers are part therapist, part bartender, part vault of secrets. Historians still argue whether these back-alley stalls were truly revolutionary hubs or just sleepy hangouts where men argued about poetry more than politics. Maybe both. You can picture it. One table discussing the fall of a vizier, another debating whether a line of Persian verse rhymes properly. The seller moves between them like a shadow, topping up water, refilling coals, pretending to be invisible. But he hears everything. He always hears everything. You sip, and the bitterness stings your tongue. No sugar here. That luxury hasn't yet trickled into these alleys. Just roasted beans and water, brewed until the foam sits thick like a velvet blanket on top. The man beside you wipes his mustache, leans closer, and mutters something about tax collectors. The seller coughs pointedly, just enough to warn the man not to say more. Secrets are traded here. but survival depends on silence. Still, there's humor tucked in the corners. The seller's apprentice, a boy no older than 12, balances 3 cups on a wooden tray and nearly topples into your lap. The crowd bursts into muffled laughter. Someone mutters, "He's got 2 left feet." Someone else replies, "Good, he'll need them to run when the guards come." Because yes, the guards do come. Sometimes slowly, sometimes with a crash of boots. And every seller knows the signs: a sudden hush, the scraping of chairs, the way a regular customer slips out the back without touching his drink. Tonight, you're lucky. Only cats and wanderers pass by. The alley deepens in silence, and you realize the strange intimacy of this ritual. You don't just drink coffee. You enter into a contract. You trust the seller not to poison you, not to report you, not to mock the way you hold the cup. In return, he trusts you to pay, to return, maybe even to protect him if trouble stirs. And the trouble always stirs. Remember that reality check earlier? If you lived in this time, you might already have been arrested for simply sitting here. Coffee bans weren't rare. They happened repeatedly across Ottoman history, often declared by sultans who feared coffee houses as breeding grounds for sedition. Yet here you sit, cup in hand, heart slowing, head buzzing from both caffeine and caution. The seller doesn't smile, but his eyes flicker when you drain the last drop. He takes the cup, sets it upside down on the saucer, and lets the grounds drip into strange, swirled patterns. He doesn't say a word, but you know what he's doing. Later, he'll read those shapes, telling fortunes, predicting futures, and maybe, just maybe, guiding you toward another cup tomorrow. The ember's glow still flickers behind you as you step farther into the city, the taste of that first bitter cup clinging to your tongue. The night air carries whispers, rumors that float from shuttered windows and crooked alleyways. A few lamps swing lazily overhead, casting uneven shadows, and you can almost sense the weight of invisible eyes watching your steps. You don't realize it yet, but every sip of coffee in this world carries risk. Not because the beans are poisoned, but because the act of drinking itself is defiance. Coffee, in the Ottoman capital, doesn't always mean comfort. Sometimes it means punishment. The rulers, those grand sultans wrapped in silks and authority, often looked at coffee with suspicion. You can imagine them frowning from gilded balconies, muttering. People gather in cafes, they talk, they scheme. And so the easiest solution? Ban the brew altogether. Here's your solid historical fact. Sultan Murad IV, who reigned in the early 1600s, is infamous for his harsh bans on both tobacco and coffee. And not just mild fines kind of bans. We're talking death penalty if caught drinking in public. Murad supposedly prowled the streets of Istanbul in disguise, testing the people. If he caught you sipping coffee, well, let's just say the foam on your cup would be the last froth you'd ever see. But here's the quirky part. Bans never really worked. In fact, they sometimes made coffee even more desirable. Cellars just went underground, literally. Tiny basement shops with low ceilings, walls stained with smoke, and barely enough space for 6 men to huddle together. They'd light a single lantern, brew in silence, and drink like conspirators planning a heist. The more illegal it felt, the better it tasted. Imagine paying good money just to risk your neck over a hot, muddy drink. That's dedication, or maybe addiction. You squeeze through one of these makeshift doorways now. It smells of damp wood, smoke, and a kind of sweet bitterness that clings to your clothes. A seller with tired eyes beckons you to sit. His hands tremble slightly, not from age but from the thrill of risk. Every ladle he lifts, every pour he makes, is technically an act of rebellion. You sip, and for a moment you feel the dangerous joy of joining a brotherhood where the entry fee is nothing more than a coin and a willingness to ignore the law. Still, historians argue whether Murad's crackdowns were really as brutal as the stories say. Some claim he executed drinkers without hesitation, Others suggest his bans were more symbolic, a way of flexing imperial muscle rather than wiping coffee from existence. The truth, like the grounds at the bottom of your cup, is murky. What's certain is this: coffee always found a way back. Your host leans closer, whispering the latest code. Sellers often had signals for warning each other of raids. One might bang a ladle against copper 3 times, another might whistle a tune only insiders recognized. Tonight, the code is simpler. A boy runs through the street outside, coughing loudly in a pattern that's clearly not just a sick child. The room stiffens. Every drinker sets his cup down, foam trembling on the surface. For a heartbeat, you think the guards are coming. Then silence returns. The seller chuckles softly and says, "Just a drill." You laugh too, but your pulse hasn't slowed. Humor is the only way to keep the edge off. One man at the corner table jokes, "If they catch us, at least we'll go out caffeinated." Another replies, "Better than being remembered for choking on stale bread." The seller doesn't join in. His smile is too cautious. The truth is, these sellers walk a razor's edge every night. If they obey the law, they starve. If they defy it, they risk everything. And so, they become experts at disguise. By day, some sell bread or spices in the open market. By night, they pull aside the curtain, reveal the sesvis, and invite regulars to step inside. You can picture a man kneeling by a rug stall, pretending to measure fabric while a secret compartment holds the roasted beans. Even the cups themselves become accomplices. Some are designed to break easily, so in case of a raid they can be smashed against the wall, no evidence left behind. Others are deliberately mismatched, so an officer glancing in thinks the men are simply drinking broth. Clever, right? You begin to realize that Ottoman coffee sellers were less like baristas and more like magicians of survival. But survival doesn't erase the tension. You take another sip, letting the ground slide across your tongue, and imagine what it must feel like to live constantly with that blend of excitement and fear. Maybe you're already hooked. Not just on the drink, but on the thrill of drinking what you're not supposed to. The seller taps your cup gently, eyes flicking toward the door. The conversation in the room picks up again, men mumbling poetry, trading gossip about merchants, laughing at the idea that anyone could truly stop the flow of beans into the city. Coffee, one says, travels faster than soldiers. And maybe he's right. Every ban eventually crumbles, every crackdown leaves cracks wide enough for steam to slip through. The sellers know this, which is why they never give up. You drain your cup, heart still racing from that false alarm, and step back out into the night. Somewhere down the alley, another ember glows, another seller stirs, another secret waits. The alley bends, narrowing until the stones beneath your sandals feel more like a path meant for cats than for people. You push through, shoulders brushing the damp walls, and suddenly the air changes. The scent hits first, roasted beans laced with something sharper, spiced, almost sweet. You follow it like a thread, and there he is, another seller crouched before a tray of glowing embers, his copper pots, sesvis, lined up like soldiers awaiting orders. It's the ritual that pulls you in. He doesn't rush, doesn't chatter. He spoons fine, dark powder into the pot, adds water from a copper jug, then slides the sesvi gently into the ash. The liquid bubbles, hisses, foams, then calms. He lifts it just at the right moment, foam intact, liquid unburned, and pours in a slow stream. Watching it is strangely hypnotic, like watching someone blow glass or weave silk. You realize this isn't just a drink. It's a performance. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Ottomans perfected this style of brewing, where the key wasn't speed but patience. Coffee grounds were left in the cup, foam was prized, and each sesvi could only make 2 or 3 servings at once. Unlike European cafes that would later churn out dozens of cups in minutes, here every pour felt intimate, deliberate, almost sacred. But the ritual has hidden meanings, too. Sellers developed their own gestures. A long pause before stirring might mean, "Be careful what you say tonight." A deliberate spill of foam could signal, "Strangers listening." Even the way the cup was placed, handle turned toward you or away, carried unspoken messages. To the untrained eye, it looked like clumsy serving. To regulars, it was a coded language of survival. The seller glances at you now, eyes sharp in the lamplight. He doesn't ask what you want, he knows. Everyone here wants the same thing, a moment of safety, a taste of rebellion, a place to pretend you're free from the watchful eyes of authority. He stirs slowly, lets the foam rise again, then pours. You take the cup, its porcelain warm against your fingers, and feel like you've been initiated into a ceremony older than the stones around you. Here's the quirky tidbit: sometimes sellers added eggshells to the brew. Why? To control the foam. Too much froth and the coffee would spill. Too little and customers would think you'd cheated them. Eggshells stabilized the bubbles, gave them that glossy sheen. Imagine explaining to a modern barista that their latte art needs a sprinkle of breakfast waste. The drink is thicker than you expect, more stew than beverage. You sip cautiously, and the seller nods approvingly. Around you, men lean over their cups, blowing gently at the foam but never daring to gulp. It's rude to drink too fast. Coffee here is meant to stretch time, to make hours pass like lazy clouds. The slower you sip, the more respect you show. Historians still argue whether these elaborate brewing rituals began as practical necessity or cultural invention. Was foam really that important for taste, or was it just a convenient excuse to turn drinking into theater? Either way, you realize the ritual itself became the seller's shield. As long as everyone focused on the beauty of the pour, the hiss of the coals, the elegance of the cup, nobody asked too many dangerous questions about what else was happening in these rooms. A man at the far corner breaks into laughter, slapping his knee, and the seller scolds him gently, "Don't shake the foam." The others chuckle, because it's true, too much movement and the fragile froth collapses. It's as though the coffee itself demands silence and respect, turning rowdy men into careful schoolchildren for a few precious moments. But there's a darker undertone. You notice how the seller never lets his hands stray far from the ladle. It's not just a tool, it's a weapon if needed. One flick and the scalding brew could blind an intruder. The copper pots themselves, heavy and sharp-edged, could crack a skull. You start to wonder how many coffeehouse fights ended not with swords but with flying sesvies. The apprentice shuffles forward, carrying a tray with 2 cups. He places one in front of a merchant, one before a sailor. The sailor raises his eyebrow at you, smirking. "First time?" You nod. He chuckles. "You'll learn." Foam on top, grounds on the bottom, patience in between. That's the order of things. You swirl your cup, watching the dark sludge shift at the bottom, and realize how fragile this whole scene is. One careless word, one wrong gesture, and the illusion of calm could shatter. Yet for now, the room is hushed, unified by nothing more than cups of liquid darkness and the slow, careful hands of the seller. He tops off your drink with a final flourish, the stream of coffee catching the lamplight, gleaming like molten bronze. The foam quivers, perfect, unbroken. You take another sip, and the world outside, the bands, the soldiers, the fear, feels like it belongs to another city entirely. In here, there is only the glow of embers, the hiss of boiling water, and the silent agreement that nothing matters more than the ritual. The foam still clings to your lips as you leave that emberlit stall and drift deeper into the city's restless veins. The streets twist like a knot, pulling you toward a heavier hum of voices. You know before you even see it, you've stumbled into a full coffee house. The seller here is no lonely magician with a single sesvi, he's the conductor of a whole orchestra of murmurs, coughs, laughter, and the scratch of dice on wooden boards. The doorway is wide, lanterns swaying in the breeze, shadows dancing across low tables packed tight. You push inside and instantly feel it, thick smoke curling from long pipes, perfumed water splashed on wrists, and that steady pulse of conversation rising and falling like a tide. A seller hustles between the tables, balancing trays of cups so gracefully you wonder if he was born with extra arms. And here comes your grounded historical fact. Ottoman coffee houses, especially in Istanbul, became social centers where men from every walk of life gathered. Poets, scholars, janissaries, merchants, even beggars, they all found common ground over a cup of black brew. It was one of the rare places in the empire where hierarchy thinned, if only for an hour. A vizier and a dockworker could argue about the same poem, sipping from cups poured by the same seller. But equality brings danger. Gather too many voices in one room, and sooner or later, someone starts whispering things better left unsaid. That's the reason rulers feared these coffee houses, not for the drink, but for the conspiracies brewed alongside it. Murmurs of uprisings, critiques of tax collectors, debates over which vizier was secretly corrupt, it all fermented faster than the beans themselves. You slide onto a cushion at the edge. The seller pours your cup with practiced speed, then sweeps away to another table before you can thank him. Around you, men lean close, voices low, eyes darting toward the doorway. Every conversation is a performance, every whisper both innocent and dangerous. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some sellers learned to disguise their coffee houses as theaters. They'd hire storytellers or shadow puppet performers to entertain customers. Out front, it looked like harmless fun, just men laughing at a trick or clapping at a puppet play. But behind the screen, serious matters could be discussed under the cover of applause. You sip your coffee now and imagine the same trick unfolding before your eyes, a puppet flapping its arms while someone in the corner quietly plans a revolt. Historians still argue whether these coffee houses were truly hotbeds of rebellion or if officials simply exaggerated their danger. Maybe most customers really were just bored men escaping their wives' sharp tongues for an evening. Maybe the so-called conspiracies were nothing more than exaggerated gossip. The truth lies somewhere in between, half politics, half poetry, all of it simmering in porcelain cups. The seller returns, this time to drop off a tray of dice and a small board scratched with squares. Two men begin a game, muttering curses under their breath. Another table erupts in laughter as someone recites a scandalous poem about a greedy taxman. And there, by the window, a man in a green turban gestures passionately with his cup, his foam trembling dangerously close to spilling. It's hard not to smile. The coffee house is both tense and joyful, heavy with secrets yet light with play. You notice how the seller never sits, never relaxes. He's always moving, an invisible thread stitching the room together. He refills cups, wipes spills, quiets an argument before it flares too loudly. He's the unofficial guardian of both peace and conspiracy, trusted to keep the coals burning and the secrets safe. At one point, he glances your way and lifts his brows as if to ask, "Are you here for the coffee, or for the company?" You hesitate, then shrug. Maybe both. He chuckles softly and moves on. Then it happens, a sudden hush. A man at the door clears his throat, adjusting his belt in a way that feels too deliberate. The seller stiffens, and so does everyone else. Could it be a spy? A soldier in disguise? The foam in your cup suddenly feels heavier. A joke hangs half-told in the air, its punchline frozen. After a long pause, the tension breaks, the man is just a merchant, shaking dust from his robe. Laughter bursts out, shaky at first, then louder, relief spilling into the air. Someone shouts, "Buy him a cup for the scare." Even the seller cracks a smile as he pours. You sip again, and the bitterness feels sweeter now. It's the taste of survival, of conspiracies narrowly avoided, of stories shared in the half-dark. The coffee house buzzes on, a living hive of voices and secrets, its walls saturated with centuries of smoke and whispers. And somewhere inside, you realize, The cellar is the quiet keeper of it all, the man who holds both the sesvi and the trust of every trembling heart in the room. The voices from that crowded coffee house still echo in your ears as you drift into a quieter lane, lantern light fading to a softer amber. You follow the smell, always the smell, until you reach another little stall. This one feels different. No crowds, no games, no laughter spilling into the street. Just a man with a long mustache, eyes twinkling like a stage performer waiting for his cue. He greets you not with words, but with a story. He pours the first stream of coffee, his ladle steady, then begins weaving a tale. The characters come alive with each swirl of foam, heroes, lovers, villains, all rising and falling in the steam. You realize this seller isn't just selling coffee. He's selling theater, distraction, and a safe cloak under which secrets can pass unnoticed. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In Ottoman culture, storytelling was a staple of social life. Medders, professional storytellers, performed in coffee houses, using only their voice, a cane, and sometimes a handkerchief to shift between characters. These performances could be comic, tragic, or slyly political. And often, the coffee seller himself doubled as the performer, filling the room with tales while pretending not to overhear the more dangerous whispers. The story tonight begins with a sultan disguised as a beggar, walking the streets to spy on his subjects. The seller deepens his voice for the sultan, squeaks it for the beggar's companion, then lets out a booming laugh that makes your cup tremble in your hand. Everyone chuckles, but beneath the humor is a sharper edge. A reminder that rulers might be watching at any time, hidden behind humble robes. Quirky tidbit for you. Some sellers deliberately inserted nonsense into their stories as a way of mocking authority without being accused outright. A tale about a greedy fish who eats every other fish in the pond? Sure, on the surface it's comedy. But the regulars knew it was a jab at a certain tax-hungry official. The brilliance lay in plausible deniability. If accused, the seller could shrug and say, "What? It's just a fish story." You sip your cup, the foam clinging stubbornly, and let the rhythm of his words carry you. Each phrase distracts from the low murmur at the back table, where two men lean close, exchanging something that glints faintly in the lantern glow. A letter. A coin. You'll never know, because your eyes are fixed on the seller as he mimics a donkey braying so loudly that even the neighbors outside laugh. Historians still argue whether sellers truly used storytelling as cover for secret dealings, or whether modern romantics like to imagine it so. After all, it's just as possible that they simply wanted to keep their customers entertained long enough to buy a second round. Yet the timing of certain tales, the way audiences hushed at just the right moments, suggests there was more than coincidence in these performances. The seller bows theatrically as he finishes his tale, sweeping the sesvi like a prop, and a round of polite applause fills the air. He smiles, but there's calculation behind his eyes. The laughter has done its job. The watchers outside would see nothing more than a harmless evening of jokes. The whispers, the trades, the tiny acts of rebellion all safely tucked beneath the sound of clapping. You take another sip, the ground's thick now at the bottom of your cup. The seller leans closer, lowering his voice. "Every cup has a story," he says, tapping the rim. "Sometimes I tell it, sometimes you do." His mustache twitches as though he's hiding another punchline. Maybe he is. Or maybe he's hinting that you, too, have joined the performance just by sitting here. One man in the corner raises his hand, asking for another tale. The seller obliges, spinning a quick fable about a merchant who tried to water down his coffee to save money, only to be cursed with endless hiccups. Everyone laughs, partly at the joke, partly because they've all tasted a cup like that at least once in their lives. You can't help but chuckle too, nearly spilling your drink. When the laughter fades, the seller's eyes meet yours again. They seem to say, "You've seen enough for tonight. Time to move on before the wrong ears catch the wrong words." You nod, set your empty cup on the tray, and slip back into the alley. Behind you, his voice rises once more, bright and playful, masking the quieter exchanges happening just out of sight. You keep walking, lulled by the rhythm of your sandals on cobblestones, when another smell catches you off guard. This isn't just roasted beans, it's sweeter, heavier, like roses bruised in a brass bowl. You follow the trail and duck beneath a low awning. Inside, the seller's shop looks less like a cafe and more like an apothecary. Shelves of glass jars gleam in the lamplight, each stuffed with herbs, spices, and what looks suspiciously like dried petals. The seller grins at your raised eyebrow. He ladles coffee as usual, but before pouring, he sprinkles a pinch of crushed rose into the sesvi. The steam rises, perfumed, softening the bitterness that clings to your tongue. You sip and suddenly feel as though you've stepped into a garden at midnight, the taste both familiar and utterly foreign. Here's the mainstream historical fact: Ottoman coffee culture often blended with scent. Rosewater, mastic, cloves, and even ambergris were added to cups, not just for flavor but for atmosphere. Sellers sometimes burned incense beside their stalls, filling the air with a haze that made customers feel as though they'd stepped into a dream. This wasn't only about taste, it was about seduction of the senses. But here's the quirky tidbit: some sellers didn't just mask the smell of coffee with incense, they used it to cover up more clandestine business. Frankincense smoke could blur a stranger's face, or at least make it harder for passers-by to see who was sitting inside. A sharp hit of musk oil might even serve as a signal: tonight's the night, come prepared. Imagine modern baristas using pumpkin spice lattes as secret spy codes, ridiculous, but oddly effective. You glance around the room now and notice how carefully the seller tends his incense burner. The smoke coils lazily toward the rafters, giving everything a dreamlike haze. Customers lean closer, voices muffled, their words dissolving into the scented air. You can almost convince yourself you're safe, hidden under this perfumed veil. Historians still argue whether the heavy use of incense was merely cultural habit or something more tactical. Did sellers genuinely believe the smoke kept evil spirits away, or was it just a convenient excuse to blur the line between honest business and forbidden gathering? Either way, the effect is undeniable. The room feels sealed, private, as though you've stepped out of the empire and into a secret pocket of air where rules no longer apply. A man beside you dips his finger into his coffee, then smears a streak across his wrist. Perfume, he jokes. Cheaper than rosewater. The others laugh, but the seller frowns and waves his ladle as if to scold him. Respect the cup, he says. It carries more than taste. You can't help but grin. The smell of cardamom clings to your clothes now, and the smoke pricks your eyes. For a moment, you imagine what it must have been like for outsiders, Europeans, travelers, traders who stumbled into one of these fragrant dens. To them, it must have felt like walking into an alchemist's cave. Bitter liquid, strange smoke, men whispering in a dozen languages. Exotic? Absolutely. Harmless? Not always. The seller sets a tiny silver bowl beside your cup, filled with candied fennel seeds. For the breath, he murmurs. Whether he means to sweeten your mouth or disguise it from suspicious wives later, you can't tell. Either way, the seeds crackle between your teeth, mixing strangely with the bitter coffee and floral smoke. The humor tonight comes from the youngest customer in the room, who sneezes violently every time the seller adds more incense to the burner. After the third sneeze, someone teases, "Careful, boy, if the guards don't catch you, the roses will." Even the seller chuckles, though he pretends to hide it behind his mustache. You lean back against the wall, cup warming your palms, eyes half closed as the haze thickens. The conversation around you drifts in and out, muffled by smoke and scent. For the first time tonight, you feel yourself floating, less like a spy in a dangerous city and more like a dreamer slipping gently toward sleep. But just when your shoulders relax, the seller taps your cup sharply. His eyes narrow, his voice low. Don't let the perfume fool you. Secrets are still secrets. You nod, suddenly awake again. The rose-scented veil is lovely, but it's also a reminder. Behind every cloud of incense, something is being hidden. And tonight, you're part of it, whether you like it or not. The scent of roses still clings to your clothes as you drift back into the labyrinth of streets, but soon another pull takes over, curiosity about what really hides inside those tiny porcelain cups. You've seen sellers act as performers, as rebels, as guardians of ritual. But tonight, you notice something stranger. They are also messengers. You duck into a cramped shop where the seller works with brisk efficiency. He pours your coffee, yes, but he's also scratching something onto a scrap of parchment tucked beneath the counter. When he sets down your cup, his finger lingers on the handle for a moment too long. The man across from you picks it up, sips, and later leaves without a word. A folded slip of paper stays behind, concealed beneath the saucer. Here's the mainstream historical fact. Coffee houses in the Ottoman world doubled as information hubs. Merchants shared trade news, poets tested verses, and yes, sometimes spies passed coded messages. With a steady flow of strangers and locals alike, these spaces became natural conduits for gossip and secrets. Sellers, always present, often became unofficial postmen. And now, the quirky tidbit. Some sellers allegedly carved tiny notches into the wooden handles of their cups as signals. One notch might mean safe to talk, 2 notches could warn of unwelcome ears, while a chipped rim meant leave quickly. To an outsider, it looked like clumsy craftsmanship. To insiders, it was a whole silent vocabulary. You swirl your coffee and glance at your cup's handle. Is that a scratch? Or just wear from years of use? The seller avoids your eyes, busying himself with the coals. A sailor at the next table finishes his drink, flips the cup upside down, and slides it across the wood. When the seller lifts it, you catch a glimpse of a rolled scrap hidden in the thick sludge of grounds. It disappears into his sleeve before you can blink. Smooth. Historians still argue whether sellers actively spied for the government or merely acted as neutral go-betweens. Some records suggest they were pressed into service, forced to report anything suspicious. Others paint them as independent agents, loyal only to their regulars. Either way, they held an uncomfortable power, knowledge of who drank with whom, who whispered what, who left letters behind in sticky cups. You take another sip and suddenly feel the weight of being watched. A man across the room tilts his head, studying you too long. Is he just curious about the stranger? Or is he wondering if you've seen too much? Your cup feels heavier in your hand. The seller glides over, topping it with a fresh pour, his face unreadable. Maybe that's the trick, being invisible while knowing everything. The tension breaks with humor, as it often does. The apprentice, barely a teenager, misreads the notches on a cup and delivers a coded drink to the wrong man. Confused, the customer frowns at the handle, then bursts into laughter. What's this? A warning, or just a bad carpenter? The room chuckles, and the boy blushes crimson while the seller smacks him lightly with the ladle. Crisis averted. Still, the laughter doesn't erase the truth. You sip slowly, heart thudding, realizing each movement in this place might mean more than it seems. A cough at the door, a cup placed upside down, a saucer slid an inch too far, any of it could be a signal. The whole shop hums with unspoken language, and you are both participant and outsider, half aware of a game that could decide who survives the night. When you drain your cup, the seller whisks it away, holding it with care. He doesn't flip it, doesn't set it down in front of you again. Instead, he tucks it onto a high shelf, as if to say, this one doesn't need to be read. Maybe it means you're safe. Or maybe it means you've already said more than you realize. You stand to leave, brushing the scent of smoke from your sleeves, and catch one last glimpse of the seller slipping another folded paper into a bag of beans. A customer takes the sack without looking inside and vanishes into the alley. And just like that, Istanbul's web of whispers stretches a little wider, all hidden inside something as ordinary as a steaming cup of coffee. The night deepens, and you follow the shuffle of carts and the creak of donkey hooves down toward the waterfront. The air grows damp, salted, and laced with the smell of tar and rope. Here, coffee isn't brewed for comfort or storytelling, it's unloaded in sacks, carried across shoulders, hidden under tarpaulins, and whispered about in half a dozen tongues. You find a seller perched on a crate, his sesvi balanced on a small brazier. He isn't brewing for neighbors, he's waiting for traders. His stall looks more like a customs checkpoint than a cafe. Bundles of beans from Yemen and Ethiopia arrive under the cover of night, tucked between bales of cloth or jars of spices. He buys, he tastes, he listens. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Yemen was the heart of early coffee trade, particularly the port of Mocha, which gave its name to the drink centuries before chocolate ever got involved. By the 16th century, Ottoman ships ferried beans north through the Red Sea and across to Istanbul, turning the city into the empire's buzzing coffee capital. But the quirky tidbit. Some traders deliberately slipped letters, gossip, even coded notes inside the sacks of beans. Coffee wasn't just cargo, it was courier. Imagine discovering the latest scandal about a vizier not in a letter handed over directly, but scribbled on parchment buried deep in your breakfast supply. It's like fortune cookies, except instead of cheesy proverbs you might find, don't trust the man in green. You sip from the seller's rough clay cup and taste something different, sharper, earthier, with the dust of long roads clinging to it. He smiles knowingly. Each batch tells a story, he explains. This one from Yemen carries whispers of Sufi mystics who first drank coffee to stay awake during all-night prayers. Another from Ethiopia carries legends of goats dancing after nibbling the berries. And tucked inside a third sack, he claims, was once a stolen love letter smuggled across seas under the nose of customs. Historians still argue whether coffee spread so quickly because of its unique taste, its stimulant power, or simply because it traveled with stories attached. Every shipment brought more than beans. It carried news of wars, rumors of plagues, poems from wandering scholars, even recipes for spice blends that never quite tasted the same twice. Sellers, perched at the crossroads, became guardians of all that wandering gossip. As you linger, a merchant pulls a folded scrap from a bag of beans, glances at it, then tucks it into his belt without a word. The seller pretends not to notice, but his smirk betrays him. The brazier crackles, the sesvi hisses, and you realize that this entire dockside stall is less about caffeine and more about information disguised as trade. Of course, humor survives even here. A dockworker tips a sack too quickly, spilling beans across the planks. "There goes my fortune," he cries, falling to his knees to scoop them up. Another shouts, "At least it wasn't salt, you can't drink that." The laughter eases the tension, but the seller still gives the clumsy worker a sharp look. Beans are money, secrets, survival. Spilled beans are more than just a cliché. The night breeze tugs at your robe, and you feel the weight of this hidden network. Coffee has become the bloodstream of an empire, veins stretching from Yemeni mountains to Istanbul's alleys, carrying more than flavor. Every sack you see could be a trove of hidden words, every seller a gatekeeper who decides which whispers flow and which stay buried. You finish your cup, gritty at the bottom, and hand it back. The seller wipes it once on his sleeve, then slips it behind the crates, as though to say, "You drank not just coffee tonight, but a story that traveled thousands of miles." The coals glow brighter, the beans shift in their sacks, and the gossip of the world keeps moving forward one sesvi at a time. You leave the docks behind, though the taste of salt and ash lingers on your tongue, and wander uphill again into the curling streets. The houses press tighter, the air grows warmer, and suddenly a burst of laughter drifts from a crooked doorway. You peek inside and find not a shop at all, But a home, its sitting room transformed into an improvised coffee corner. Here, sellers do something different. They're not only pouring drinks for coin but staging little performances of hospitality. In the Ottoman world, serving coffee at home was as important as serving it in public. Families prided themselves on their technique, on the gleam of their cups, on the fragrance of the beans. In many households, the art of coffee preparation was considered a reflection of character. Here's the mainstream historical fact: offering coffee to guests became a cornerstone of Ottoman etiquette. Refusing a cup was seen as rude, even suspicious. Marriage negotiations often unfolded over coffee, with the bride-to-be showing her skills in preparing it. Sometimes, if she wasn't thrilled with the suitor, she salted the coffee instead of sugaring it, an unspoken but very clear rejection. Now for the quirky tidbit. In some stories, grooms-to-be endured salty coffee without flinching, proving their patience and devotion. Imagine sitting in your best kaftan, grinning politely while drinking what tastes like hot seawater, all because walking out would mean admitting defeat. That's commitment or masochism, depending on your angle. Tonight you watch a seller-turned-host carefully spoon coffee grounds into a tiny sesvi while his wife polishes porcelain cups that look like they've never seen daylight. He pours, slowly, deliberately, letting the foam rise just so before tipping it into the cups. The guests murmur approval, and the conversation flows as smoothly as the dark liquid. Here, the coffee isn't just a drink. It's an audition, a performance, a pledge of respect. Historians still argue whether these home rituals emerged directly from Sufi gatherings, where coffee was first a spiritual aid, or whether it evolved in tandem with urban coffee houses. Either way, sellers carried the practice back into their homes, blending the commercial with the personal, turning every brew into an opportunity to show refinement. You take a sip and feel the foam cling to your lips, thick and velvety. The host grins, proud of his craft. A neighbor chimes in with gossip: who married whom, who bought new slippers, who secretly feeds too much sugar to their children, and suddenly the little sitting room hums with life. No spies, no merchants, just people savoring warmth in both cup and company. Of course, humor sneaks in. A mischievous child sneaks a spoonful of coffee grounds, thinking it's chocolate, and immediately makes a face like he's swallowed ashes. The room bursts into laughter, and the poor boy sulks, muttering that grown-ups drink the strangest things. Still, as the laughter fades, you feel the weight of what coffee represents here. It isn't just hospitality, it's trust. By sipping from the same pot, you declare yourself part of the household, however briefly. The walls may be cracked, the streets outside noisy, but inside this room, with coffee steaming between you, everything feels calm and deliberate. When the cups are drained, the host flips them upside down onto saucers, a playful tradition that hints at another layer of meaning: fortune-telling, though here it's offered only as a joke. One guest peers into the sludge and gasps dramatically, "I see a long journey, and perhaps, a donkey that hates you." The table erupts again, but you can't help wondering how often such jokes became serious omens. As you step back into the street, the smell of roasted beans clings to your clothes again. The home fades behind you, but the memory of that intimate circle stays warm, reminding you that sellers weren't just merchants or spies, they were also hosts, weavers of social fabric, turning strangers into guests with nothing more than a little foam and a steady hand. The city grows quieter as the hour stretches deep into the night. Lanterns sputter, shutters creak closed, and yet you notice a faint glow from behind a heavy wooden door tucked into a side street. You push it open and find yourself inside a space thick with incense, books, and an atmosphere heavy enough to make your eyelids droop. This is no ordinary coffee corner, it's the secret haunt of poets, mystics, and rebels who all insist they're just here for a drink. Here's your mainstream historical fact: Ottoman coffee houses weren't merely shops, they became intellectual hubs, sometimes called schools of the wise. Poets recited verses, scholars debated philosophy, and storytellers wove entire epics between sips. Coffee sellers were more than baristas, they were curators of culture, deciding who could speak, what tales were told, and which conversations stretched into dawn. But the quirky tidbit. Some sellers moonlighted as amateur astrologers, offering fortune-telling sessions using the patterns left in emptied cups. Customers tilted their cups just so, and suddenly the grounds resembled ships, swords, or even future spouses. Historians admit with a chuckle that it's hard to separate performance from belief. Did people genuinely trust the coffee sludge, or was it just an excuse to giggle about fate with strangers? Tonight, you sit cross-legged on a rug while a seller sets down a cup before you. His hands are stained with smoke, his beard sprinkled with ash from the brazier. He tells you this blend was roasted longer than usual, to sharpen the mind for debate. Around you, a circle of men listens to a wandering poet compare the taste of love to burnt coffee beans, bitter, dark, and unforgettable. Everyone laughs, not because it's true, but because it's clever. The seller doesn't laugh, though. He leans close and mutters that in the foam of another man's cup he saw a crescent moon cut by a sword, a bad omen, he claims. You wonder whether he truly believes it or simply knows how to stir a little mystery into the night. Historians still argue whether these readings carried genuine weight in Ottoman society or whether they were simply entertainment layered onto an already social drink. A musician plucks at a lute, and the coffee seller nods with approval, adjusting the flame beneath his sesvi like a conductor guiding the tempo. The smell thickens, dark and smoky, as though the beans themselves are conspiring to hold the room together. You sip, and your tongue tingles, not from spice, but from the electric mood of voices overlapping, laughter rising, and secrets slipping between jokes. And then, the humor. One guest insists the grounds in his cup look like a camel. Another declares it's clearly a duck. The seller shakes his head gravely and says, "Gentlemen, you're both wrong, it's a badly drawn elephant." The entire circle collapses into laughter so loud you fear the neighbors will complain. But beneath the jokes, you feel something deeper pulsing here. Coffee has become an excuse, a cover, really, for community, dissent, imagination. Sellers aren't just serving drinks. They're creating sanctuaries, spaces where thoughts too sharp for daylight can be dulled with foam and laughter. When you finally stand, your legs stiff from sitting too long, the seller presses the cup into your hand. "Keep it," he says. "The grounds inside may tell you something later." You glance down at the half-dried sludge, which, if you squint hard enough, might look like a crooked road. Or perhaps a sword. Or perhaps, more honestly, nothing at all. Still, as you walk back into the street, the idea lingers. Coffee may sharpen your mind, but sellers sharpen your imagination. They whisper futures into mugs, wrap secrets in foam, and turn sludge into stories. And whether or not you believe them, you find yourself clutching the cup just a little tighter, as if it holds not grounds, but possibilities. By now, the streets are hushed, but you catch the faint creak of a cart rolling over cobblestones. Following the sound, you find a man hunched over his wooden contraption, steam wafting from a brazier bolted to its side. He's no shopkeeper with a fixed address, he's a street seller, drifting from square to alley, calling softly into the night, "Carvey, hot carvey." The way he stretches the syllables makes it sound almost like a lullaby. Here's the mainstream historical fact. Mobile coffee vendors were crucial to Ottoman cities. Not everyone could leave their homes for the bustling Carvajane, so sellers wandered neighborhoods, brewing on the move. They carried brass pots, cups, and sometimes even miniature braziers strapped to their carts. You could step outside your door and buy a steaming cup without ever entering a shop. Now the quirky tidbit. Some of these sellers became so well known in their districts that children followed them like ice cream trucks. Imagine wide-eyed kids chasing after a man dragging a squeaky cart of scalding hot coffee, chanting for their parents to buy a sip. Slightly less whimsical than popsicles, but in the Ottoman world, A cup of late-night carve was a treat that brightened even the dullest evening. The man you watch tonight stops at a corner, paws with a practiced flick of the wrist, and hands steaming cups to two women peeking out from a doorway. They giggle, thank him, and vanish inside again. He hums to himself, a tune lost somewhere between prayer and lullaby, while adjusting the embers. His face glows in the flicker of firelight, and his eyes dart about with the instinct of someone who knows shadows might be watching. Historians still argue whether these vendors operated independently or whether most were secretly tied to fixed coffee houses, acting as delivery arms for wealthier shopkeepers. The truth is likely a mix. Some hustled freely, dodging taxes, while others served as the tentacles of bigger establishments, reaching into neighborhoods too quiet to support a shop of their own. You trail him down an alley where the buildings lean so close you could touch both walls at once. A cat follows too, perhaps hoping for scraps. The seller pauses to rest, leaning against his cart, and strikes up conversation with a night guard. They sip together, sharing a few words about patrols and the weather. Here, coffee smooths the monotony of a watchman's shift, warming hands that might otherwise clutch only a cold spear. The humor sneaks in when the cart tips slightly on uneven stones, and the seller mutters something under his breath that sounds very much like, "Even the Sultan doesn't deal with cobblestones this bad." You bite back a laugh, realizing that even centuries ago, the true universal complaint wasn't politics, but bad road maintenance. Watching him, you sense the precariousness of his life. A gust of wind could ruin his embers, a spilled pot could end his evening's income, and yet he trudges on, steady and patient. His coffee isn't gilded with porcelain cups or decorated with foamed artistry, it's practical, quick, and meant to bring a sliver of joy to those who otherwise wouldn't seek it out. As he disappears around a corner, the sound of his squeaky cart fading, you feel oddly comforted. The city may be sprawling, with coffee houses as grand as palaces, but here is proof that even in the narrowest alley, a cellar makes sure the aroma of beans can find you. A moving hearth, rolling warmth, a reminder that no corner is too forgotten for the comfort of coffee. The night is wearing thin, yet Istanbul doesn't truly sleep. You drift toward the docks, where the air smells of tar, salt, and roasted beans. The clatter of rigging against masts is joined by a more familiar sound, the scrape of a metal pot against a brazier. You stumble onto a warehouse loft converted into a makeshift gathering hall. Here, you notice men in rich kaftans and foreign cloaks slipping through the door, ducking beneath the beams as if they're sneaking into a tavern. But it isn't wine being poured tonight, it's coffee, and it's being brewed stronger than you've ever tasted. Your mainstream historical fact is this: Ottoman coffee sellers often hosted foreign envoys in back rooms, where diplomacy played out over porcelain cups. Alliances were negotiated, tribute debated, and even betrayals whispered between sips of the dark liquid. Coffee houses, especially those near ports or embassies, became unofficial embassies themselves, neutral ground where a Venetian might speak candidly with a Turk, or a Frenchman might slip secrets to a local informant. And here's your quirky tidbit: certain sellers were rumored to stir a pinch of salt into a diplomat's first cup. Why? To watch his reaction. A grimace suggested arrogance, while a polite swallow hinted at self-control. It was a test wrapped in hospitality, an edible lie detector. Historians grin at the tale, but still argue whether it's truth or playful myth passed down by gossiping merchants. Inside the hall, you watch one seller glide between tables like a conductor. He places cups not at random, but with careful choreography, ensuring the right pairs of hands meet across saucers. A French envoy raises his eyebrows over a sugared sip, while an Ottoman vizier pretends to study the foam but is really measuring the man's patience. You catch fragments of conversation, grain prices, border disputes, whispers of alliances. And over all of it, the seller hums softly, as if the negotiations are just background noise to his brewing. One envoy chuckles too loudly after a joke, and the seller gently taps his spoon against a cup, the signal for restraint. The laughter dies, replaced by murmurs. Somehow, without raising his voice, this coffee seller maintains order in a room thick with egos and ambition. The humor emerges when a Spanish visitor, unaccustomed to the bitterness, gulps his cup in one swallow, grimacing as though he'd bitten into raw olives. The seller smirks and says, "Careful, Señor, this is not a horse race. Coffee is meant to be savored." The room bursts into laughter, the tension easing for just a moment. Still, you sense the stakes. A single misplaced word could ignite conflict. A shared pot could soothe it. The seller's role is invisible yet immense. Without him, the gathering would unravel into silence or shouts. With him, it flows like coffee poured into porcelain, smooth, deliberate, inevitable. Historians still argue whether these sellers truly influenced politics or simply provided the stage. Did the fate of empires hinge on a man with a ladle, or was he merely serving while history wrote itself? You decide. It hardly matters, the line between host and influencer blurs in every age. As the dawn creeps near, the envoys slip out, their cloaks brushing the floor, their voices hushed. The seller wipes down his pots, hiding any trace of the night's conversations. For him, it was just another evening of pouring, listening, and pretending not to notice that history itself had been passed from cup to cup. You step back into the chill air, your head buzzing not just from caffeine, but from the realization that diplomacy sometimes depends less on throne rooms and more on a steaming pot balanced over glowing coals. The air grows cooler, carrying with it the hush of the city just before dawn. You duck into a cramped workshop where a coffee seller leans over a cluttered table, his face lit by the glow of embers. Around him, brass sesvies of every size, jars of spices, bundles of herbs, and even a few dusty scrolls. He mutters to himself while carefully adjusting the grind of beans with a mortar and pestle, as if the tiniest variation could decide the fate of the next brew. Here's the mainstream historical fact: Ottoman coffee sellers were amateur scientists in their own right. They perfected grind size with stone mills, debated whether cold or hot water should be added first, and experimented with how long the grounds should boil before settling. Their pursuit of flavor was closer to alchemy than cooking, a delicate balance between bitterness and sweetness that set them apart from mere servants of the cup. The quirky tidbit: some sellers swore by astrology charts. They brewed according to planetary alignments, claiming coffee made under Venus would enhance love, while one stirred under Mars might sharpen courage. Picture it: a weary sailor waiting for his cup, while the seller delays the pour because Mercury is still in retrograde. You roll your eyes, but admit it's exactly the kind of superstition that gives a late-night brew a mystical aura. You lean closer as the seller sprinkles a pinch of cardamom into the bubbling pot. The scent bursts through the air, sharp yet comforting, like a blanket with teeth. He whispers, "Too much heat scalds the soul, too little leaves it asleep." You wonder if he's talking about coffee, or life itself. Historians still argue whether these experiments shaped the standardized Ottoman style or whether sellers exaggerated their methods to impress customers. Some claim it was pure showmanship, a seller fiddling with embers, counting stars, and reciting nonsense just to make patrons believe they were sipping something profound. Others suggest these refinements genuinely influenced how coffee spread to Europe, where meticulous brewing rituals blossomed into entire café cultures. The humor surfaces when he accidentally knocks over a jar of cinnamon, coating the floor in a spicy dust storm. He coughs dramatically and mutters, "Ah, yes, cinnamon clouds, very healthy for the lungs." You stifle a laugh, realizing this man might as well be the grandfather of every modern barista who accidentally steams their own sleeve. As the mixture boils, he lifts the sesvi slowly, letting the foam rise just shy of overflowing before pulling it back, then repeating the ritual 3 times. Each cycle is like a heartbeat, steady and deliberate. When at last he pours, The dark liquid slides into a porcelain cup with a soft hiss. He places it in front of you, not with fanfare but with the quiet satisfaction of an artist presenting a masterpiece. You sip. The taste is rich, layered, somehow deeper than the cups before. You feel warmth bloom in your chest, a calm sharpness spreading through your veins. Perhaps it's only caffeine. Or perhaps his blend of science, superstition, and clumsy theatrics really has unlocked something more. Outside, the city begins to stir. Roosters crow, shutters creak open, and the spell of night breaks. But inside this tiny workshop, you sit cradling your cup, half convinced that the stars themselves have aligned just for your sip. The sky is pale now, that thin blue-grey light before sunrise stretching across the Bosporus. You drift through quieter alleys, where the last embers of the night still glow in hidden corners. Here, you find a coffee seller who looks older than the city itself. His beard is streaked with white, his hands tremble slightly as he ladles the dark liquid, yet his eyes shine with a mischievous glint. Around him are younger sellers, watching carefully, mimicking his motions, learning not only how to brew but how to survive. Here's the mainstream historical fact. Many Ottoman coffee sellers worked in dynasties, passing their shops and recipes from father to son, or apprentice to master. Families guarded their roasting methods as fiercely as treasure, ensuring that their name became synonymous with quality in a particular district. A sip in one neighborhood might be instantly recognizable as Ahmet's blend, while across town, another family swore theirs was the true taste of Istanbul. The quirky tidbit. Some sellers left secret codes in their shops, symbols carved into wooden counters or hidden behind tiles that marked safe hiding places for money, letters, or even fugitives. Imagine sipping your drink at a counter where a tiny notch actually pointed toward a concealed drawer stuffed with gossip and gold. Customers rarely noticed, but apprentices were taught the language of scratches and marks, like pirates hiding maps under the noses of kings. You watch as the old seller corrects a young man's pour. Slower, he whispers, steadying his hand. Coffee does not forgive haste. The apprentice nods, cheeks burning, but you can tell he's proud to have earned even a rebuke. This is how traditions survive, not written in books, but etched in muscle memory and carried in the quiet scolding of masters. Historians still argue whether these lineages truly preserved ancient methods unchanged, or whether each generation improvised, adding a little of their own flair while pretending to guard original secrets. Perhaps what endures isn't an exact recipe, but the illusion of continuity, an unbroken thread woven from pride and performance. The humor peeks through when the elder pauses mid-lesson to scratch his beard and mutters, "Of course, none of you will ever brew as well as I did in 52. The apprentices groan, clearly having heard this line before, and one quips back, "Yes, master, but unfortunately we weren't alive in 52. The old man swats him with a rag, laughter breaking the tension. You realize that this passing of knowledge isn't only about coffee. It's about teaching resilience, how to spot a corrupt taxman before he enters the shop, how to calm quarrelsome patrons with a joke, how to vanish the moment soldiers come knocking. These aren't written in any manual, but they're as vital as knowing when to lift the sesvi from the flame. As dawn brightens, the apprentices scatter, ready to tend their own stalls. The old man remains by his brazier, watching the coals dim with a soft smile. You sense he has seen sultans rise and fall, bands come and go, fortunes shift like the tide. Yet through it all, he has kept the ladle moving, the cups filled, the beans roasting. His legacy isn't just the coffee, it's the quiet persistence of survival, passed hand to hand like a secret recipe whispered in the dark. And as you step back into the waking city, you can almost taste that lineage in the air, bitter, sweet, smoky, eternal. The sun edges over the domes and minarets now, gilding Istanbul in soft gold. The night has unraveled, leaving behind only the faint perfume of smoke and roasted beans. You walk slower, as though each step must linger a little longer in the dreamlike corridors where sellers once kept their vigil. A final shop waits at the corner, smaller than the rest, a single ember glowing beneath a dented copper pot. The seller here doesn't speak. He simply stirs the last of his brew, ladles it into a chipped porcelain cup, and slides it toward you. His silence feels deliberate, like the end of a song that knows better than to overstay its chorus. You cradle the cup, aware that it isn't just coffee, it's the residue of centuries, a distillation of all the risks, whispers, and laughter that brewed before it. Here's the mainstream historical fact. Despite bans, raids, and endless suspicion, Ottoman coffee sellers endured. By the 18th century, coffee had become so deeply woven into urban life that no decree could uproot it. The sellers had outlasted sultans, policies, and even famines, surviving through sheer persistence. The quirky tidbit. Some sellers kept coal embers buried in clay pots, hidden under sand, so they could relight their fires even after forced shutdowns. It was a quiet defiance, a way of saying, "We will always brew again." You imagine tiny embers, glowing unseen beneath floors and counters, waiting patiently to spark back to life. Historians still argue whether the endurance of coffee culture came from its addictive caffeine draw, its social magnetism, or its underground networks of sellers who refused to yield. Perhaps it was all three, fused into something greater than beans and water, a ritual of belonging, stronger than law itself. The humor arrives when a scruffy cat leaps onto the counter, sticking its paw into the cooling grounds and licking with exaggerated disgust. The silent seller smirks for the first time all morning, murmuring, "Critics never pay." You chuckle, realizing cats were probably the true patrons all along, drawn more by warmth than philosophy. You take your final sip. The taste is sharper now, a little burnt, but oddly comforting. It feels like the right way for the journey to end, not perfect, not polished, but enduring. Just as these sellers endured, scraping through centuries with little more than hot embers and stubborn will. As you stand, the seller waves you off, already turning back to his fading fire. You step into the bright morning, feeling the city hum awake, yet you carry within you the secret pulse of the night, the quiet dignity of those who brewed under threat, who whispered stories over cups, who turned beans into survival and steam into resistance. Now, let the images soften. The clatter of cups, the hiss of boiling sesvis, the laughter of apprentices, they fade into background echoes. The streets blur, their cobblestones smoothing into a gentle rhythm beneath your feet. You no longer walk through Istanbul's alleys, you drift, as though floating on the aroma itself. The ember that glowed so fiercely begins to dim. You see it shrinking, orange to red to grey, until it is only the faintest warmth, lingering like a memory against your skin. Yet even as it fades, you know it waits, quiet, patient, ready to reignite whenever someone stirs beans into water again. Let yourself breathe more slowly now, following the rise and fall of imagined steam curling into the air. With each breath, the world grows quieter, lighter, easier to let go of. The weight of history slips away, leaving only the calm trace of its presence, like the faint ring of a bell long after it has been struck. You are safe here, carried not by the bustle of empire or the whispers of conspirators, but by the simple comfort of a warm cup shared across centuries. The night has told its story, and now it gives way to rest. So close your eyes. Let the last ember glow gently in the background of your mind. Allow the city to vanish, leaving only the hush of stillness, the promise of quiet, the comfort of dreams.